Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
Who Knows by Guy de Maupassant, first published in 1890. My God, I'm going to write down at last what has happened to me. But how can I? How dare I? The thing is so bizarre, so inexplicable, so incomprehensible, so silly. If I were not perfectly sure of what I have seen, sure that there was not in my reasoning any defect, any error in my declarations, any lacuna in the inflexible sequence of my observations, I should believe myself to be the dupe of a simple hallucination, the sport of a singular vision. After all, who knows? Yesterday, I was in a private asylum, but I went there voluntarily, out of prudence and fear. Only one single human being knows my history, and that is the doctor of the said asylum. I'm going to write to him. I really do not know why. To disembarrass myself? Yes, I feel as though weighed down by an intolerable nightmare. Let me explain. I have always been a recluse, a dreamer, a kind of isolated philosopher, easygoing, content with but little, harbouring ill feeling against no man, and without even a grudge against heaven. I have constantly lived alone. Consequently, a kind of torture takes hold of me when I find myself in the presence of others. How is this to be explained? I do not know. I'm not averse to going out into the world, to conversation, to dining with friends. But when they are near me for any length of time, even the most intimate of them, they bore me, fatigue me, enervate me, and I experience an overwhelming, torturing desire to see them get up and go, to take themselves away, and to leave me by myself. That desire is more than a craving, it is an irresistible necessity. And if the presence of people with whom I find myself were to be continued, if I were compelled not only to listen, but also to follow for any length of time their conversation, a serious accident would assuredly take place. What kind of accident? Who knows? Perhaps a slight paralytic stroke. Probably. I like solitude so much that I cannot even endure the vicinage of other beings sleeping under the same roof. I cannot live in Paris, because there I suffer the most acute agony. I lead a moral life, and am therefore tortured in body and in nerves by that immense crowd which swarms and lives even when it sleeps. The sleeping of others is more painful still than their conversation, and I can never find repose when I know and feel that on the other side of a wall several existences are undergoing these regular eclipses of reason. Why am I thus? Who knows? The cause of it's very simple, perhaps. I get tired very soon of everything that does not emanate from me, and there are many people in similar case. We are, on earth, two distinct races, those who have need of others, whom others amuse, engage, soothe, whom solitude harasses, pains, stupefies, like the movement of a terrible glacier or the traversing of the desert, and those, on the contrary, whom others weary, tire, bore, silently torture, whom isolation calms and bathes in the repose of independency, and plunges into the humours of their own thoughts. In fine, there is here a normal physical phenomenon. Some are constituted to live a life outside of themselves, others to live a life within themselves. As for me, my exterior associations are abruptly and painfully short-lived, and as they reach their limits, I experience in my whole body and in my whole intelligence an intolerable uneasiness. As a result of this, I became attached, or rather had become much attached, to inanimate objects, which have for me the importance of beings, and my house has or had become a world in which I lived an active and solitary life, surrounded by all manner of things, furniture, familiar knickknacks, as sympathetic in my eyes as the visages of human beings. I had filled my mansion with them, little by little. I adorned it with them, and I felt an inward content and satisfaction, was more happy than if I had been in the arms of a beloved girl whose wonted caresses had become a soothing and delightful necessity. I had had this house constructed in the centre of a beautiful garden, which hid it from the public highways, and which was near the entrance to a city where I could find, on occasion, the resources of society, for which at moments I had a longing. All my domestics slept in a separate building, which was situated at some considerable distance from my house, at the far end of the kitchen garden, which in turn was surrounded by a high wall. The obscure envelopment of night, in the silence of my concealed habitation, buried under the leaves of great trees, was so reposeful and so delicious that before retiring to my couch, I lingered every evening several hours in order to enjoy the solitude a little longer. One day, Signad had been playing at one of the city theatres. It was the first time that I had listened to that beautiful musical and fairy-like drama, and I had derived from it the liveliest pleasures. I returned home on foot with a light step, my head full of sonorous phrases, and my mind haunted by delightful visions. It was night, the dead of night, and so dark that I could hardly distinguish the broad highway, and consequently I stumbled into the ditch more than once. From the custom house at the barriers to my house was about a mile, perhaps a little more, a leisurely walk of about 20 minutes. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock or maybe 1:30. The sky had by this time cleared somewhat, and the crescent appeared, the gloomy crescent of the last quarter of the moon. The crescent of the first quarter is that which rises about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening, and is clear, gay, and fretted with silver. But the one which rises after midnight is reddish, sad, and desolating. It is the true Sabbath crescent. Every prowler by night has made the same observation. The first, though slender as a thread, throws a faint, joyous light, which rejoices the heart and lines the ground with distinct shadows. The last sheds hardly a dying glimmer, and is so wan that it occasions hardly any shadows. In the distance, I perceived the sombre mass of my garden, and, I know not why, was seized with a feeling of uneasiness at the idea of going inside. I slackened my pace, and walked very softly, the thick cluster of trees having the appearance of a tomb in which my house was buried. I opened my outer gate, and entered the long avenue of sycamores which ran in the direction of the house, arranged vault-wise like a high tunnel, traversing opaque masses, and winding round the turf lawns, on which baskets of flowers in the pale darkness could be indistinctly discerned. While approaching the house, I was seized by a strange feeling. I could hear nothing. I stood still. Through the trees there wasn't even a breath of air stirring. "What's the matter with me?" I said to myself. For 10 years I had entered and re-entered in the same way, without ever experiencing the least inquietude. I never had any fear at nights. The sight of a man, a marauder, or a thief would have thrown me into a fit of anger, and I would have rushed at him without any hesitation. Moreover, I was armed. I had my revolver, but I didn't touch it, for I was anxious to resist that feeling of dread with which I was seized. What was it? Was it a presentiment, that mysterious presentiment which takes hold of the senses of men who have witnessed something which, to them, is inexplicable? Perhaps. Who knows? In proportion as I advanced, I felt my skin quiver more and more, and when I was close to the wall, near the outhouses of my large residence, I felt that it would be necessary for me to wait a few minutes before opening the door and going inside. I sat down then on a bench under the windows of my drawing-room. I rested there, a little disturbed, with my head leaning against the wall, my eyes wide open under the shade of the foliage. For the first few minutes I didn't observe anything unusual around me. I had a humming noise in my ears, but that has happened often to me. Sometimes it seemed to me that I heard trains passing, that I heard clocks striking, that I heard a multitude on the march. Very soon, those humming noises became more distinct, more concentrated, more determinable. I was deceiving myself. It was not the ordinary tingling of my arteries which transmitted to my ears these rumbling sounds, but it was a very distinct, though confused noise, which came without any doubt whatever from the interior of my house. Through the walls I distinguished this continued noise. I should rather say agitation than noise, an indistinct moving about of a pile of things, as if people were tossing about, displacing and carrying away surreptitiously all my furniture. I doubted, however, for some considerable time yet the evidence of my ears, but having placed my ear against one of the outhouses, the better to discover what that strange disturbance was inside my house, I became convinced, certain, that something was taking place in my residence which was altogether abnormal and incomprehensible. I had no fear, but I was, how shall I express it, paralyzed by astonishment. I didn't draw my revolver, knowing very well that there was no need of my doing so. I listened a long time, but could come to no resolution, my mind being quite clear, though in myself I was naturally anxious. I got up and waited, listening always to the noise, which gradually increased, and at intervals grew very loud, and which seemed to become an impatient, angry disturbance, a mysterious commotion. Then, suddenly ashamed at my timidity, I seized my bunch of keys. I selected the one I wanted, guided it into the lock, turned it twice, and pushing the door with all my might, sent it banging against the partition. The collision sounded like the report of a gun, and there responded to that explosive noise, from roof to basement of my residence, a formidable tumult. It was so sudden, so terrible, so deafening, that I recoiled a few steps, and though I knew it to be wholly useless, I pulled my revolver out of its case. I continued to listen for some time longer. I could distinguish now an extraordinary pattering upon the steps of my grand staircase, on the waxed floors, on the carpets, not of boots or of naked feet, but of iron and wooden crutches which resounded like cymbals. Then I suddenly discerned, on the threshold of my door, an armchair, my large reading easy-chair, which set off waddling. It went away through my garden. Others followed it, those of my drawing-room, then my sofas dragging themselves along like crocodiles on their short paws, then all my chairs bounding like goats, and the little footstools hopping like rabbits. Oh, what a sensation! I slunk back into a clump of bushes, where I remained crouched up, watching meanwhile my furniture defile past, for everything walked away, the one behind the other, briskly or slowly according to its weight or size. My piano, my grand piano, bounded past with the gallop of a horse and a murmur of music in its sides. The smaller articles slid along the gravel, and the rest of my furniture, which followed it, began to march over me, tramping on my legs and injuring them. When I loosed my hold, other articles had passed over my body, just as a charge of cavalry does over the body of a dismounted soldier. Seized at last with terror, I succeeded in dragging myself out of the main avenue, and in concealing myself again among the shrubbery, so as to watch the disappearance of the most cherished objects, the smallest, the least striking, the least unknown, which had once belonged to me. I then heard in the distance noises which came from my apartments, which sounded now as if the house were empty, a loud noise of shutting of doors. They were being slammed from top to bottom of my dwelling, even the door which I had just opened myself unconsciously, and which had closed of itself when the last thing had taken its departure. I took flight also, running toward the city, and only regaining my self-composure on reaching the boulevards, where I met belated people. I rang the bell of a hotel where I was known. I had knocked the dust off my clothes with my hands, and I told the porter that I had lost my bunch of keys, which included also that of the kitchen garden where my servants slept in a house standing by itself on the other side of the wall of the enclosure which protected my fruits and vegetables from the raids of marauders. I covered myself up to the eyes in the bed which was assigned to me, but could not sleep, and I waited for the dawn, listening to the throbbing of my heart. I had given orders that my servants were to be summoned to the hotel at daybreak, and that my valet de chambre knocked at my door at 7 o'clock in the morning. His countenance bore a woeful look. "A great misfortune has happened during the night, monsieur," said he. "What is it?" "Somebody has stolen the whole of monsieur's furniture, everything, even to the smallest articles." This news pleased me. Why? Who knows? I was complete master of myself, bent on dissimulating, on telling no one of anything I'd seen, determined on concealing and in burying in my heart of hearts a terrible secret. I responded, "They must be the same people who've stolen my keys. The police must be informed immediately. I'm going to get up and I'll join you in a few moments." The investigation into the circumstances under which the robbery might have been committed lasted for 5 months. Nothing was found, not even the smallest of my knickknacks, nor the least trace of the thieves. Good gracious! If I had only told them what I knew, if I had said, I should have been locked up. I, not the thieves, for I was the only person who had seen everything from the first. Yes, but I know how to keep silence. I shall never refurnish my house. That were indeed useless. The same thing would happen again. I had no desire even to re-enter the house, and I did not re-enter it. I never visited it again. I moved to Paris, to the hotel, and consulted doctors in regard to the condition of my nerves, which had disquieted me a good deal ever since that awful night. They advised me to travel, and I followed their counsel. I began by making an excursion into Italy. The sunshine did me good. For 6 months I wandered about from Genoa to Venice, from Venice to Florence, from Florence to Rome, from Rome to Naples. Then I travelled over Sicily, a country celebrated for its scenery and its monuments, relics left by the Greeks and the Normans. Passing over into Africa, I traversed at my ease that immense desert, yellow and tranquil, in which camels, gazelles, and Arab vagabonds roam about, where, in the rare and transparent atmosphere, there hover no vague hauntings, where there is never any night, but always day. I returned to France by Marseille, and in spite of all its Provençal gaiety, the diminished clearness of the sky made me sad. I experienced, in returning to the continent, the peculiar sensation of an illness which I had believed cured, and a dull pain which predicted that the seeds of the disease had not been eradicated. I then returned to Paris. At the end of a month I was very dejected. It was in the autumn, and I determined to make, before winter came, an excursion through Normandy, a country with which I was unacquainted. I began my journey in the best of spirits at Rouen, and for 8 days I wandered about, passive, ravished, and enthusiastic, in that ancient city, that astonishing museum of extraordinary Gothic monuments. But one afternoon, about 4 o'clock, as I was sauntering slowly through a seemingly unattractive street, by which there ran a stream as black as the ink called Eau de Robec, my attention, fixed for the moment on the quaint, antique appearance of some of the houses, was suddenly attracted by the view of a series of second-hand furniture shops, which followed one another door after door. Ah, they had carefully chosen their locality, these sordid traffickers in antiques, in that quaint little street, overlooking the sinister stream of water, under those tile and slate-pointed roofs, on which still grinned the veins of bygone days. At the end of these grim storehouses, you saw piled up sculptured chests, Rouen, Sèvres, and Moustier's pottery painted statues, others of oak, Christs, virgins, saints, church ornaments, chasubles, capes, even sacred vases, and an old gilded wooden tabernacle where a god had hidden himself away. What singular caverns there are in these lofty houses, crowded with objects of every description, where the existence of things seems to be ended, things which have survived their original possessors, their century, their times, their fashions, in order to be bought as curiosities by new generations. My affection for antiques was awakened in that city of antiquaries. I went from shop to shop, crossing in 2 strides the rotten 4-plank bridges thrown over the nauseous current of the Eau de Robec. Heaven protect me, what a shock! At the end of a vault which was crowded with articles of every description, and which seemed to be the entrance to the catacombs of a cemetery of ancient furniture, I suddenly descried one of my most beautiful wardrobes. I approached it, trembling in every limb, trembling to such an extent that I dared not touch it. I put forth my hand. I hesitated. Nevertheless, it was indeed my wardrobe, a unique wardrobe of the time of Louis XIII, recognizable by anyone who'd seen it only once. Casting my eyes suddenly a little farther, toward the more sombre depths of the gallery, I perceived 3 of my tapestry-covered chairs, and farther on still, my 2 Henry II tables, such rare treasures that people came all the way from Paris to see them. Think, only think in what state of mind I now was. I advanced, haltingly, quivering with emotion, but I advanced, for I am brave. I advanced like a knight of the Dark Ages. At every step I found something that belonged to me. My brushes, my books, my tables, my silks, my arms, everything except the bureau full of my letters, and that I could not discover. I walked on, descending to the dark galleries in order to ascend next to the floors above. I was alone. I called out. Nobody answered. I was alone. There was no one in that house, a house as vast and tortuous as a labyrinth. Night came on, and I was compelled to sit down in the darkness on one of my own chairs, for I had no desire to go away. From time to time I shouted, "Hello, hello, somebody!" I had sat there certainly for more than an hour when I heard steps soft and slow. I didn't know from where. I was unable to locate them, but bracing myself up, I called out anew, whereupon I perceived a glimmer of light in the next chamber. "Who is there?" said a voice. "A buyer," I responded. "It's too late to enter thus into a shop." "I have been waiting for you for more than an hour," I answered. "You can come back tomorrow." "Tomorrow I must quit Rouen." I dared not advance, and he did not come to me. I saw always the glimmer of his light, which was shining on a tapestry, on which were 2 angels flying over the dead on a field of battle. It belonged to me also. I said, "Well, come here." "I am at your service," he answered. I got up and went toward him. Standing in the centre of a large room was a little man, very short and very fat, phenomenally fat, a hideous phenomenon. He had a singular straggling beard, white and yellow, and not a hair on his head, not a hair. As he held his candle aloft at arm's length in order to see me, his cranium appeared to me to resemble a little moon in that vast chamber encumbered with old furniture. His features were wrinkled and brown, and his eyes couldn't be seen. I bought 3 chairs which belonged to myself, and paid at once a large sum for them, giving him merely the number of my room at the hotel. They were to be delivered the next day before 9 o'clock. I then started off. He conducted me, with much politeness, as far as the door. I immediately repaired to the commissaire's office at the Central Police Depot, and told the commissaire of the robbery which had been perpetrated, and of the discovery I had just made. He required time to communicate by telegraph with the authorities who had originally charge of the case for information, and he begged me to wait in his office until an answer came back. An hour later, an answer did come back, which was in accord with my statements. "I am going to arrest and interrogate this man at once," he said to me, "for he may have conceived some sort of suspicion and smuggled away out of sight what belongs to you. Will you go and dine and return in 2 hours? I shall then have the man here, and I shall subject him to a fresh interrogation in your presence." "Most gladly, monsieur. I thank you with my whole heart." I went to dine at my hotel, and I ate rather better than I could have believed. I was quite happy now, thinking that the man was in the hands of the police. 2 hours later, I returned to the office of the police functionary who was waiting for me. "Well, monsieur," he said, on perceiving me, "we haven't been able to find your man. My agents can't put their hands on him." "Ah," I felt my heart sinking. "But you have at least found his house?" "Yes, certainly, and what is more, it's now being watched and guarded until his return. As for him, he's disappeared." "Disappeared?" "Yes, disappeared. He ordinarily passes his evenings at the house of a female neighbour who's also a furniture broker, a queer sort of sorceress, the widow Bidouin. She hasn't seen him this evening and can't give any information in regard to him. We must wait until tomorrow." I went away. Ah, how sinister the streets of Rouen seemed to me, now troubled and haunted. I slept so badly that I had a fit of nightmare every time I went off to sleep. As I didn't wish to appear too restless or eager, I waited till 10 o'clock the next day before reporting myself to the police. The merchant hadn't reappeared. His shop remained closed. The commissary said to me, "I've taken all the necessary steps. The court's been made acquainted with the affair. We shall go together to that shop and have it opened, and you shall point out to me all that belongs to you." We drove there in a cab. Police agents were stationed round the building. There was a locksmith too, and the door of the shop was soon opened. On entering, I couldn't discover my wardrobes, my chairs, my tables. I saw nothing of that which had furnished my house. No, nothing, although on the previous evening I could not take a step without encountering something that belonged to me. The chief commissary, much astonished, regarded me at first with suspicion. "My God, monsieur," said I to him, "the disappearance of these articles of furniture coincides strangely with that of the merchant." He laughed. "That is true. You did wrong in buying and paying for the articles which were your own property yesterday. It was that which gave him the cue." "What seems to me incomprehensible," I replied, "is that all the places that were occupied by my furniture are now filled with other furniture." "Oh," responded the commissary, "he's had all night, and has no doubt been assisted by accomplices. This house must communicate with its neighbours. But have no fear, monsieur. I'll have the affair promptly and thoroughly investigated. The brigand shall not escape us for long, seeing that we are in charge of the den." Ah, my heart, my poor heart, how it beats. I remained a fortnight at Rouen. The man didn't return. Heavens, good heavens, that man. What was it that could have frightened and surprised him? But on the 16th day, early in the morning, I received from my gardener, now the keeper of my empty and pillaged house, the following strange letter. "Monsieur, I have the honour to inform monsieur that something happened the evening before last, which nobody can understand, and the police no more than the rest of us. The whole of the furniture has been returned. Not one piece is missing. Everything is in its place, up to the very smallest articles. The house is now the same in every respect as it was before the robbery took place. It's enough to make one lose one's head. The thing took place during the night Friday to Saturday. The roads are dug up as though the whole fence had been dragged from its place up to the door. The same thing was observed the day after the disappearance of the furniture. We are anxiously expecting monsieur, whose very humble and obedient servant I am, Philippe Rodin." Ah, no. Ah, never. Ah, no. I shall never return there. I took the letter to the commissary of police. "It's a very clever restitution," said he. "Let's bury the hatchet. We shall nip the man one of these days." But he has never been nipped. No, they have not nipped him. And I am afraid of him now, as if of some ferocious animal that has been let loose behind me. Inexplicable. It's inexplicable. This chimera of a moonstruck skull. We shall never solve or comprehend it. I shall not return to my former residence. What does it matter to me? I'm afraid of encountering that man again, and I shall not run the risk. And even if he returns, if he takes possession of his shop, who is to prove that my furniture was on his premises? There's only my testimony against him, and I feel that that is not above suspicion. Ah, no, this kind of existence has become unendurable. I have not been able to guard the secret of what I've seen. I couldn't continue to live like the rest of the world, with the great fear upon me that those scenes might be reenacted. So I have come to consult the doctor who directs this lunatic asylum, and I've told him everything. After questioning me for a long time, he said to me, "Will you consent, monsieur, to remain here for some time?" "Most willingly, monsieur." "You have some means?" "Yes, monsieur." "Will you have isolated apartments?" "Yes, monsieur." "Would you care to receive any friends?" "No, monsieur, no, nobody. The man from Rouen might take it into his head to pursue me here, to be revenged on me. I have been alone, all alone for 3 months. I'm growing tranquil by degrees. I have no longer any fears. If the antiquary should go mad, and if he should be brought into this asylum, even prisons themselves are not places of security.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
So that was Who Knows by Guy de Maupassant, and it was requested by my patron Fin Narthex. So thanks very much for Fin for suggesting that one. I found it on the internet. Of course, I've got a book of Guy de Maupassant's stories, but I didn't even think of looking through that because I found a link to this one, so it was easier to read it from the screen. During the recent discussion that's been about whether I should comment after the stories, I'm going to do it, actually. I'm going to keep doing it. But a good idea came up, and it was suggested by at least 2 people. And that was that I timestamp the discussion. And apparently the purpose of this is so that people can look at a story and they know how long it takes them to fall asleep or something. And they can look at it and go, the whole episode is 1 hour, 10 minutes. However, the story is only 40 minutes, so they may then make a calculation that they need so many minutes to fall asleep, and if the length of the story isn't long enough, then they would seek something elsewhere. I suppose that's what it is. Anyway, it doesn't seem like a bad idea, and it's relatively easy for me to implement, so if I remember. So I will do that. Let's say something about the story now. Remember, if you've listened this far and you don't want to listen, please stop. And I've got compilations for hours and audiobooks. I've got The Phantom of the Opera, no commentary. I've got Frankenstein, I've got Dracula, I've got all of those. Turn of the Screw, Don't Look Now. I've got a lot of many hour long works that don't have any of my commentary. So please enjoy those and don't listen to me if you don't want to. Okay, Who Knows by Guy de Maupassant. So Guy de Maupassant, born in 1850, died in 1893, was a French writer who made significant contributions to the development of the short story genre during the latter half of the 19th century. He was born in Tourville-sur-Arc, France. Maupassant was influenced by the literary circle of Gustave Flaubert, who became his mentor. He published a famous short story, Boule de Suif, meaning a dumpling, and that was 1880. A lot of his stories initially dealt with the kind of situation around the Franco-Prussian War. He wrote 300 short stories, goodness me, 6 novels and 3 travel books, and a volume of poetry. 2 stories which we need to kind of reference are this one, Qui sait, Who Knows, from 1890, and The Hauler, Orla, 1887, which apparently it's not a French word, orla, but it's thought to be or, meaning outside, la, out there. It means something like out there. And I've done it, so I'm going to put a link if I remember, but if not, please go and look for it in the history. And it is like this about a man who may be insane because a lot of paranoid, weird stuff with a real paranoid flavour. And I'm going to probably mention that later, comes up in the story, and like in both the stories, right? So he explores themes of madness, the supernatural, and the darker aspects of human nature. Maupassant's life was cut short by the effects of syphilis, which he'd contracted in his youth. After a suicide attempt in 1892, he was committed to a mental asylum in Paris, where he died in 1893 at the age of 42. Let me just check. I thought he killed himself. No, he didn't kill himself. It was an attempted suicide, and then he was institutionalized, and he died then probably of the syphilis. So it's worth saying something about syphilis. I remember when I was doing my training, it had died out because we treated it with antibiotics, but before it was a terribly common disease. In the late 19th and early 20th, syphilis was a major cause of insanity, and there's neurosyphilis, which is the 3rd stage, I think. The disease, which is caused by the bacterium Treponema pallidum, was widespread and untreatable until antibiotics, and it would go through several stages. So first of all, I remember you get a sore that goes away for quite a long time, it comes back, and then you have physical symptoms. And the final stage is it gets into your brain, so the brain and the spinal cord, causing a range of neurological and psychiatric symptoms, including delusions, hallucinations, memory loss, personality change. And in fact, the asylums were crowded with syphilis-related insanity, which they used to call general paralysis of the insane. And, it was really common. And I remember when I worked in psych liaison in a general hospital for a number of years, actually. And sometimes it wouldn't be clear. It would be clear that somebody was in fact psychotic, and it wouldn't be clear why. It wasn't a delirium, and it wasn't clearly any functional disorder, such as, it didn't look like bipolar affective disorder or schizophrenia. So, but they were psychotic, and we would kind of test them, and almost like we would, as a act of desperation, we would go like, we don't know, so I'll tell you what, let's check for syphilis. We'd check for HIV, check for syphilis, and it never was syphilis. Never. In all those years, we never had a patient. And I remember one guy who was like, he'd been a sailor around the world, and in the Merchant Navy when he was younger, he was an older man, and we're like, oh yeah, maybe it's, because we couldn't come up with any other reason why he was so, I mean, okay, there are lots of things, so, and the other one was like viral encephalitis. We would, somebody who's been sane suddenly becomes really almost, and sometimes violently, psychotic, Anyway, so he had it. So towards the end of his life, given the progression of his syphilis and its known effects on the brain, it's possible that he was having, this is my theory, probably somebody cleverer than me has come up with this, but that he was having some symptoms of paranoia and delusional thinking, and potentially even hallucinations, that, and this story, what is that, isn't it? So like the Orla, it's the same thing. We don't know, and I think this story is very clever because it is called Who Knows, and ultimately neither we nor the protagonist have a clue as to what's really going on. So I think obviously, and people do this with Turn of the Screw as well, which came out just after Who Knows. So it's unlikely that he wouldn't have read it beforehand. Let me check that again. Yes, Turn of the Screws, 1898. So he definitely wouldn't have read it. But of course, I only mention that because that's said to be the first psychological horror story or ghost story, where psychology plays a major part, and we wonder whether the protagonist is actually insane or paranoid, having paranoid delusions and hallucinations, rather than it being a straight thing. So, but I think de Maupassant kind of precedes that. Maybe we're saying it was in English, turn of the screw, but it seems to me that that's what we're looking at here. So let's look at the evidence just for fun. As I say in the notes, I've probably been reading too many detective stories recently that I'm like, yeah, let's look at the evidence. So let's look at the evidence. So the fact that to suggest it's maybe insanity is he himself wonders what's happening, and he expresses how strange and odd and silly but yet worrying it is. And that is, of course, people who suffer from mental disease disorders often have a feeling of dread and a knowing that something's not right, but they don't know just what, and they wonder about themselves. Obviously, it's very common. So there's that. There's the fact that he's the only one who sees this antiquarian. Is the fact that he checks himself into a mental institute. Why would you do that if you had no doubts about what you'd seen? He clearly does have doubts about his own sanity, and he checks into a mental asylum. And the doctor who doesn't say, "Oh, go on, get out of here." Now, of course, we might be cynical and say, "Well, the doctor's getting paid for this," but that would be very, very cynical, and we would never have a psychiatrist just giving someone a diagnosis because that person comes to them and says, "You know what? I think I've got this," and he goes, "Oh yeah, give me the fee, and I'll give you the diagnosis." That would never, never, never happen with any conditions that we're having at the moment in our society, like exploding mental health conditions. Not a mental health condition that makes you explode, but there is a real increase in certain conditions being diagnosed. And I said, if I sent my grandmother, they would diagnose her, and she's dead. So anyway, that's just me interjecting. This is why you're here, I guess. But those are just my own thoughts. So there we have it. Yeah, insane, mental asylum, nobody sees the antiquary. But what about the argument? So we go, yeah, it's hallucination. I mean, come on, furniture doesn't move apart from in Beauty and the Beast. It does. In Fantasia, I want to say, does it do it there? Anyway, apart from in cartoons and children's stories, does furniture move? No, it doesn't generally on its own. So that is to suggest it's insanity. However, let's look at it from the other point of view. The furniture really did go. Yeah, somebody. So if you're saying it's not insanity, somebody came and stole all his furniture, moved it to a shop in Rouen, then took it away from the shop when no, they didn't, because that could have been a hallucination. But the fact is, his furniture did move. And then it moves back overnight. Somebody moves the fence. His gardener is a witness to this. The fact that the police take him seriously, so he goes and says, I mean, can you imagine? I'm being really cynical, the police being interested in a burglary. I was burgled once. They could not care less. And in fact, I don't know if you remember me going on about when my car had the catalytic converter stolen. And that was a real pain. Again, police were very pleasant, but had no intention of investigating it. But the police in this case take him seriously. So that suggests it is true. It is, and if it's true, it's supernatural, because that's the only explanation. A comment because Guy de Maupassant wasn't stupid, and so there's a comment by the police commissary, who says, I've just done the Phantom of the Opera, so I'm used to French police at the moment. I'm probably going to do a Maigret detective story, so I'm going to be totally immersed in the French police system soon. But if I'm not already, but where was I? Yeah, the police officer says, "Oh, it's all gone." He says, "Oh yeah, well he had all night to do it, and he could have had some accomplices." Well, if we rule out the accomplices, what the police officer is suggesting is that moving all that furniture overnight, he didn't see the amount of it, to be fair. But is Maupassant actually saying Do you know what? A man could do it overnight. Is he saying that? I think he might be saying that. And that is another undermining of our hero's argument that it's supernatural. So, but on the whole, and then of course in the end, the thing that suggests that he is insane, jumping back to the insanity, is he says at the end about the place, the asylum, not being a safe place because the antiquary might come and revenge himself on me. What for? You haven't done anything to the antiquary. So again, this is a flavour of paranoia, you know, when you begin to suspect people are out to get you when they're not. I think what is good about the story is that it is, who knows? I don't love the title, but it's a good title. If you can have both things, I think aesthetically I don't love it, but I think it encapsulates the story. Who knows? We don't know. And whichever way we go from the evidence we have, I don't think we can come firmly down on either side. So we end up with who knows. But I mean, we may have a preference. Each of us, each of you who's heard it will have a preference. Some of you will think, oh yeah, it's obviously an insanity. Or others will go, no, it's definitely supernatural. Me, I tend to go for the supernatural, but then that is what I am. The last, you know, that's what I'm into, you know. The last lines, you know, even prisons themselves are not places of security. So literally, we take it as the antiquary could come and get him. Yeah, fine. How could he break in? And then the other thing on a metaphorical level, the prison can be seen as a symbol for the narrator's own mind and his inability to find peace and security even within the walls of the asylum mirrors his psychological turmoil. But in the end, who knows?
Everybody dies, don't they? Some come back, don't they? Isn't that so? Isn't that so?